bit about. So I'm Bobray Bordelon. I am part of this project. I'm at Princeton University. And with me today is our team leader, Grace Liu, who is at Westchester University. Grace, say hello. That's Grace. And then also with us is Rashelle Nagar, who is at Stanford University.
Hi.
And then Jennifer Boettcher, who is at Georgetown University.
Howdy.
And then I also want to mention two people who are not part of the presentation, but did a lot of work and contributed is Wynn Nagayan and Jordan Sorty. And so they are part of this. So first thing we are going to do as more people come in is we have an incredibly simplistic poll just to begin with. And let's see, where did my things go? All right, are people seeing the poll?
Or maybe need to share your screen first. Share the presentation slides first.
Okay, that should be, we just did this a moment ago. Let's try again, polls. Okay, I'm gonna relaunch so I can get started.
Yeah, because it says ended. This is how we know it's live, folks.
Relaunch, all right. So.
Yes.
All right, if everybody could answer this very quick. Do you talk about data quality in your class or consultation? Okay, so it looks like roughly 75% of us do. 74%. And when we put this question, of course, we discussed this could mean a zillion different things, which is fine. Okay, so I'm just going to end this one. All right, do we think we have a fair number of people in now to sort of really start? All right, so I'm going to assume that is a yes. So what we're going to do is first, Grace is going to give us an overview of the project. So Grace.
Sure. So about 2 years ago, it's very fortunate our group received Institute of Museum and Library Services grant funding to support our project on building awareness and competency about evaluating data quality. And during the first year, we organized the 7 sessions of the National Forum webinar series. I believe many of you probably have attended at least one of the sessions. So what is new for the second year? We have converted the transcript of the webinar series into the data quality literacy guidebook. We have made a record from OCLC. We probably would be able to have us copy or paste that record. If you're interested, you could also create that record through your technical services. And I really thank you, Bobray, for the Princeton University's help to make that happen. And we also created a series of knowledge briefs. So these are really synthesized the ideas, get high-level information understanding about evaluating different kinds of data. I will talk to you more about this knowledge briefs later. And we updated our project website, and we created this website domain dataqualityliteracy.org. Hopefully we will help us put into the chat so you can take a look. It's officially launched this morning. Get everything ready for you to take a look. And also there are some hidden gems. I really like Rashelle made a great effort to put in the design in the book. So we have some inspiring quotes and case studies, and we have included some appendices, additional content from our colleagues from Stanford and Yale. Now the OCLC, you'll be able to see the ebook, and there's the OCLC record number if you wanted to take a look. Now I'll have Bobray to launch the second poll.
All right, so the second poll is a little bit more complex. So I can get back to, this is not working. Not getting my dots, but
Still not showing.
yeah, I know. Let me try again. If not, I'm just gonna tell you what it is, and then we're gonna stop. Go forth. So more polls. Okay, now it's letting me. So I'm gonna relaunch.
It's showing.
Yes. Okay. So you can check off as many as you would like. Which areas do you feel comfortable, and define comfortable for yourself, talking about data quality? Quantitative, qualitative, public opinion, admin, commercial, governmental, none of this stuff. Okay, so it looks like, as our results are coming in, most people, the largest number, seem to be comfortable with quantitative, but that's still slightly less than half, fairly equal for qualitative. And then we have about 25% of the people who really are not comfortable with any of these. So hopefully our things will help. Okay, so we are 8 minutes in. This is our results. So we're 8 minutes in. So a couple of things that I did not say at the beginning. So yes, we're recording, we're doing all these things. Jennifer went over that. This is brought to you by iAssist, and I can't really see the chat, but if someone could put in, so in case someone does not know what iAssist is, it is an international social science data association, and we certainly welcome you to join, and we put on many events throughout the year, as well as a conference that will be in Bristol, United Kingdom. So let's go on with our content. So what I am going to be doing, we pass this, is we're going to be talking a little bit about how you might be able to use some things in this book in your research consultations and or your teaching. We invite you to use this OER and adapt it for your needs. Later, my colleagues will provide additional concepts and examples of other resources our team has developed. When we are discussing data quality and research, with the possible exception of acquisitions, it is normally not, is the data good or bad, but is the quality of the data going to answer my question in part? And if so, what should I know about the data in order to use? So it's not so much, is it good or bad, but does it fit my needs? And what are the limitations of? A common dilemma is that we often have multiple sources that might be able to answer a question. So I'm going to go to just another. So I've developed over time many charts for commonly used sources in health, finance, macroeconomics. I've done similar ones for surveys that you might not think of going in order to try to find a variable that is not normally there. But what's missing from these is question specific. It's this researcher as opposed to another researcher. So these are useful ways to help, but again, it's not going to get down to the nitty gritty. So what I want to do is to go through some examples from 5 different chapters. And the first one is going to be the longest, so just so that you don't think I'm going to kill the whole presentation, but it covers a lot of different things. So for those of you that attended the webinar series, the second one of the featured people was Janet Curry from Princeton University. And she posed a number of different questions for us. And she pointed out that from a user's point of view, a high quality data set allows the user to answer the question of interest. One rarely has all they need, so almost always there will be trade-offs. And some of the features that are important is, are the data elements relevant to the research question? Does the sample allow inference about the population of interest? What is the data provenance? Is it understood? Can it be cross-checked against other sources? Is the sample large enough to allow for meaningful statistical testing? And is the data accessible to researchers? So what's available to me may not be available to someone else. All of these are in the book, so I know that depending on your screen, it could be quite small. That's okay. You're not expected to be able to read this. But this is just an example of 3 commonly used. So right now we're looking at health data, but it could have been labor data where you said, let me look at the current population survey, the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, and the panel study of income dynamics. So it's more about what are the types of things that you should ask in this. And so I'll just kind of briefly go over some of the things. So for example, let's say the relevance question. All of these are relevant to a certain extent, but does it have all of the things that I need for my question? So as an example, natality data once included questions about alcohol consumption, but due to low data quality, those questions were removed. So when I'm looking at it, that the questions are there for a certain number of years, then they're no longer there, but should I use for the earlier years? Hospital discharge data has the list price, which is not the price that we necessarily pay, and doesn't have family information and very limited demographics. Insurance claim data has limited demographic information and types of services, particularly drugs. So how would you find this information out? Well, the thing we tell our patrons all day, every day, read the documentation, read the code book, but also read papers that have come out either by the organization or by scholars. They will often point these things out. Is the data representative? As an example, vital statistics on stillbirth or fetal loss differ by state. It's because each state has different reporting standards. Hospital discharge, by its very name, means you have to have been admitted. And as an example, during the height of the COVID pandemic survey, many people who would have been admitted were turned away or stayed away. Insurance claims that may not be updated. How the sample is constructed is important. One thing that you always have to think about is the sample size. If it's not sufficient at the highest level, that's already answered your question. But once you start to subset, if you can, by gender, by race, and so forth, will you have enough people left? So one thing I always recommend is before you go too far, to do a quick crosstab on the most important demographic to see if the sample size is still sufficient. Validation. Maybe you want to look at things such as the natural limits, such as the mother's age or birth weight. For cost, diagnosis creep often happens where we actually see that certain procedures are offered more because they provide more cost. Outlying charges, things like that. Valid inferences, even if the data set is large enough for coverage, is it enough for that specific condition? So in this case, we'd be talking diseases perhaps, but are there still enough people in it? And then perhaps the most important is accessibility. So there are data sets that if you are not a citizen of the US government or the European Union, you cannot use. More common we see is that you need a terminal degree, meaning either a PhD already, so you're a faculty member, or a JD. But with some data sets, what you can do is have your advisor sign for you, and then they can get access to it. Other questions. Why was the data collected? Who does the sample represent? Who was missing from the data and why? This is important. I usually give the example of civilian, non-institutional. So many surveys are missing the pieces of the military, and institutional could differ, but people who are incarcerated could be people in college dorms. Why are some elements missing data? How large would the effect have to be before I could detect it in a sample? When combining data sets, if you're allowed to combine, are there identifiers in common? What is the smallest unit that can be combined? What does the combined data set represent? So Jim Church from Berkeley, if you are looking at international government data quality, I highly recommend read the whole chapter. None of these chapters are terribly long, but again, he goes through so many examples of the types of things that you might need to know. So today I'm just going to highlight a few of the things that he mentioned when evaluating macroeconomic data, particularly when crossing borders. So things like missing values and geographies. If a value is missing, there is usually a good reason. For example, if the IMF does not include the variable, either the country did not report it or it was done in a way that there was no way to be comparable. There are often temporal limitations. It can be very time-consuming to gather the data. There are often breaks or changes. Transparency may not exist. Adjustments such as converting currencies, constant versus current dollars, seasonality, methodologies change constantly. They may not match. The older data may not be kept. Again, I do not expect you to be able to read this. If you do, you have amazing eyes. But Jim provides quite a few examples of how data changed over time, from international financial statistics, from the human development reports, and why that matters. Some of the examples he talked about was the International Labor Organization, when it replaced LaborStat with ILO stat. It said the old data was obsolete, and some would be missing due to cleanup. However, the old continued to appear. Policymakers make decisions typically when the data is released, though changes may occur for many years. An example was the United Nations Human Development Index. Values differ depending on the addition, and older values in newer tables were not retained. The Millennium Development Goals changed the benchmarks. The World Bank discontinued its Doing Business series after a scandal. So again, it's when you're talking to someone, I and many others say, oh, the World Bank data is great, the IMF data is great, the World Health Organization, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but all data potentially can have flaws. And so this will help you hopefully be able to know some of the things to look out for, and certainly some of the bigger scandals that have occurred. Jill Blamers, who is from Sage Data, formerly Data Planet, gave some great examples of things that had changed over time. So for example, the Bureau of Economic Analysis backcast their data. So when there were changes in different codes, they tried to go back, but of course, at a certain point, the codes are not the same, and so you can't necessarily have, so there may be breaks in data sets. And in the chapter, Jill talks about how she, not she, but how the company goes about making these changes in their decision-making process. Something we often care about, academic library statistics. It used to be a voluntary survey that was done every other year, and now it became an annual mandatory system through iPads. Well, that changes the quality of the data. It changes not just the reporting frequency, but everything else. While the researcher may just want the time series, it's important to not just cite sources, but to note the changes in methodology. In particular, one may see large differences in the numbers that changed. The Census Bureau, for example, changed the race definitions a number of times. When looking at data, one should consider changes in survey questions, variable codes, or labels between surveys. Latency or source release schedule changes, changes in reference materials, and lack of minimal documentation are all reasons why things may happen. In chapter 4, the first two parts of it, Grace, who is with us today, and then Todd Hines at Stanford, they gave an incredible overview of quality issues in financial data. So again, like Jim's chapter, they're not that long, but read them cover to cover. There are so many incredible examples that are given in it that one should know if they're going to. And Grace is going to talk a little bit later about corporate data quality. So I'm just going to highlight a few things that they talked about in this chapter, and I'm kind of combining the two because a lot of it was complementary. So often we may have missing values. Why might there be missing values? Well, the documentation may not tell us, but it could be that it's just not reported. Data errors. Sometimes a source will differ in terms of elements of a financial statement that are included. Discrepancies between sources. So I can go looking at the same variable and I look at perhaps the Standard & Poor's service, I look at a Moody's, and there are differences. And often it's due to the way they calculate. Two of the most common issues are static header data, and such as addresses, industry codes, or identifiers. And what that all means is that even though you will see a value for every year, it's not changing, and it's not the value, or let's say the address or the industry for 1975, but it's what it is now, and they backfilled it with that. And that is very common in financial databases. So if you're trying to, let's say, look at headquarters, and it's Houston now, but it was once Omaha, you may not know that. How do you know this? Well, hopefully the documentation tells you, and if not, if it's a key variable, look through the literature. As I said, Grace had a previous paper to this where she went into incredible detail looking at the literature. Changes in historical data. There have been cases where a revision was made. There's a very famous case involving a company that two of the powerful brokers asked to change the data, and it was changed. And later some academics exposed this. And so that created a lot of controversy. So again, always read the literature. Lack of transparency. Often things are their own models, and they may not want to reveal them to you. This is very common with corporate data. Reporting time issues. There are often a lot of things that happen. So it could be something as simple as fiscal year versus calendar year, but it could also be different companies report at different times. So particularly if you're looking at current, all the data may not be there. Survivor bias, this is the other big one. Does the database include companies that cease? But it could be the same thing for anything else. So let's say you're looking at health data. Do you have the older hospitals, or do you only have the ones that exist now? So again, it's not that you can do anything about it, but you just have to be aware of it. Some of Todd's material were adapted into case studies, highlighting changes in things such as headquarters, names, and industry codes. And I've often found I'm sitting down with a researcher and I have brain freeze, and I cannot think of a single one that is making my point. So Todd has quite a few examples of changes such as these, and they're involving pretty famous companies. So hopefully the person would know what these are. And then he also discusses important items such as when a company first began collecting data, backfilling the data, is there survivor bias, heavily used sources that disappear. They're quoted all the time, but the database may no longer exist. And then he also discusses superseded data and model data, which is particularly relevant for private companies. And then the final thing I want to talk about is, we already talked a little bit about with Jim, with the international data, how we put a lot of credibility in it, and should, but it's not always perfect. So Patrick, who is part of the USDA, talked about how they are using commercial data in informing their decisions that they make on our food systems. And he discusses transparency and why commercial data is needed to enhance the government data. We often put higher value into government data, but like all data, we need to understand its authority and how it was derived. And if someone could put the chat, once again, just the link for the book, then you can go through this and see in great detail the chapters. But now Grace is going to start telling us about the knowledge briefs.
Yeah, thank you, Bobray. Can you go to the next slide, Bobray?
Yes.
So overall, we have created 13 knowledge briefs, including some really high-level synthesis of the knowledge in the book, including the data reference interview, evaluating data documentation, evaluating data sets for research needs, and then we dive into some specific type of data using evaluating federal statistics, administrative data. We have 2 knowledge briefs on that and have 4 knowledge briefs related to evaluating commercial data, and then international government data and survey data. So I'm going to go to the next slide and have Rashelle to share a little bit more detail about the knowledge brief regarding administrative data.
Okay. Looking at the second poll that we conducted earlier, it seemed that some participants weren't necessarily super comfortable talking about administrative data. So it's kind of nice to be able to highlight this, a specific type. So just starting off, I want to set the stage that each chapter is based on a different speaker that we had during the webinar series. While each webinar had specific themes, the speakers brought their expertise and really highlighted and exhibited different case studies that were relevant to their specific niche area. So as Grace said, what the knowledge brief does is kind of takes those concepts and those tips and transforms it into something that's a lot more tangible and executable for incorporating into your teaching and into your research consultations. So the first part here was a presentation given by Bill Sermons, where he talked about using administrative data and blending different data sets and what have you. And when we talk about administrative data here, we're kind of defining it here as data collected for operational, programmatic, or regulatory purposes rather than statistical or research purposes. So something that's more routinely collected rather than something where you need, say, a survey. So next slide, please. So while Bill specifically talked about federal administrative data, the knowledge brief does touch on other administrative data types. So state and local administrative data and commercial administrative data. There are examples there to kind of give you an idea of what these data types are. In the chapter itself, Bill's presentation and the synthesis of it does have some takeaways and key things to keep in mind, and key takeaways for informational professionals, but the knowledge brief specifically does talk about a variety of distinct data types here and just the general benefits of using administrative data for different research purposes. But there are limitations also to keep in mind, and how can you use that in your teaching and your research consultations? So I'm going to go over what the limitations that the knowledge brief went over for administrative data and talk about some specific examples to kind of give you context and bearing in the area. So next slide, please. Okay, so the first limitation here is when repurposing administrative data, population coverage and sampling biases, such as self-selection or survivorship bias, may be of a particular concern. So I wanted to point to this really interesting paper that focuses on using administrative data and whether or not it can replace survey data in a housing model specifically. So yes, it's a specific use case of comparing a survey data with administrative data on housing needs, and it kind of sets the stage that some of the administrative data may not have funding to get as granular as some of the survey data for certain housing areas in certain counties, and that essentially, as a replacement or repurposing, it's not always a one-to-one fit. So it needs to be analyzed. You need to think about what the different variables are and what they're measuring and what the sampling looks like. So that I thought was a particularly poignant paper that made that kind of limitation, brought it to life. So next slide, please. Another limitation that's mentioned in a knowledge brief is the meanings of particular data values and administrative data are likely to be different from the user's concept of interest and may not include broader variables of interest, such as economic or demographic variables. So there's a really great paper. It's about 20 years old, but still very evergreen. That written by John Abowd and Lars Villuber, who are also speakers at the sessions that we had last year, talking just about economic data and some personal identifiers, but that specific issue of the Journal of Business and Economic Statistics did have some commentary on that specific paper. So I'm specifically focusing on Vander Klaus, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, comment on how administrative data kind of factors into it and highlights different things. So next slide, please. So this is just like a quote. It's from a paragraph on the first and second pages of the commentary paper. I have specifically highlighted here where the author talks about that the information collected for unemployment insurance specifically for administrative purposes, it may be related to the theoretical concept of interest, but may not measure what we would like to measure. For example, state unemployment insurance wage records, which employers are required to submit to the state on behalf of employees, may not provide an accurate measure of individuals' earnings in a given quarter because it excludes earnings from non-covered employment as well as earnings for jobs in another state. Again, you want to read the methodology and look at the documentation, or refer researchers you're working with to look at the documentation so they can also understand what some of those limitations are. Next slide, please. And then another paragraph quote talking about some of the factors that just might not be collected as part of the administrative data collection process. So specifically, again, with this unemployment insurance example, it can lack information about circumstances leading to job exit. So whether an individual quit or was laid off or whatever their reason for leaving was, which does play an important role in understanding the wage dynamics and job turnover and whether or not somebody does apply for unemployment insurance. And also may lack information about what an individual is doing outside of the enrollment program, right? If they have a lot of savings, they may not necessarily apply for unemployment insurance. And there's just demographic data that might not be collected, and you can't really collect after the fact and apply on top of it. So again, those are just things to kind of keep in mind. Next slide, please. So another limitation here is administrative records alone often cannot be used to address all analysis questions. For example, eligibility data does not provide information about non-participants. So I just wanted to highlight an example here of the Social Security Administration. They have public data that can be used, and but you need to kind of think about the context of who is in their sample. It's individuals who do have a Social Security number. So there are non-participants that are excluded from that universe. So if you want to make generalized analyses or takeaways from that particular population, you need to think about who's not represented in the data itself. Next slide, please. The next limitation here is micro-level administrative data is often difficult to access. Privacy and disclosure concerns are major constraints. See this all the time when I'm working with researchers who want to use census data or different government data sources, that micro data does exist out there, but it's not easily accessible. So whether or not so oftentimes when researchers want to kind of access this data, they have to apply for access. There's often a very specific sort of access mechanism that they need to use, using a specific computer in a specific room, or there are a lot of hoops to jump through here as well. So so while the aggregate data may be useful, getting to the micro level may not always be feasible. And then next slide, please. Thank you. The last limitation we have here is data cleaning and preparation can be complex, especially if the goal is to link administrative data with other data sources. So linking different data sources or cross-referencing them is a pretty common and complex thing. I work with researchers all the time, and we talk about like whether or not you can realistically merge different data sets. It requires a common identifier or a key to be able to do that effectively. And you still need to think about the type of data it is and whether or not you can actually overlap everything in a way that makes a statistical sense. So there are some linking options for different data sets, whether it's free, so on the open web from the government, or whether it's for pay. Certain data vendors will have crosswalking tools to say with financial data crosswalking company identifiers that can be quite expensive to pay for. But I always encourage researchers I work with to read the methodology for how these linking tables work. They can get an idea of how time consuming the process is, what sort of errors might occur, just the general approach of, are they using an algorithm, or are they, how are they kind of cleaning things up? So again, the documentation is a really great place to just kind of demonstrate to individuals that you need to be very cognizant of the data that you're using for the purpose that you have. And with that, I will pass it on to Grace.
Thank you, Rashelle. So from our early poll, I noticed about 17% of us feel comfortable talking about commercial data quality. It is a challenging topic. So the idea of evaluating commercial data, it was actually originated from the article Bobray mentioned I wrote in the year maybe 2019. The article title is called Data Quality Problems Troubling Business and Finance Researchers. So what I did was go through all the articles, not all the articles I can find, but written by the business finance faculty, kind of complaining about the data quality they aware of through the data sets, and oftentimes they didn't write it in the full text of the article. It's in the notes sometimes. So I altogether maybe found around 97 articles from the business literature kind of talking about the data quality issues, kind of categorize it and based on different kind of databases. So we are interested in. So that is where this idea come from, and also inspired the initiation of this project. And then also further in our webinar series, session 4, we have 4 speakers focused on talking about the commercial data quality issues. And then kind of bring all these considerations together, we finally expanded the conversation related to commercial data quality into 4 knowledge briefs, including understanding commercial data, and evaluating commercial data quality. And also we developed something like more conversational or instrumental for the researchers, for the librarians, or information professionals, data professionals, when you wanted to engage in that conversation with vendors or researchers, kind of reorganize these questions, try to fit that situation, what questions you could ask when you talk to vendors and researchers. I will talk a little bit more about the conversation with researchers. So imagining if you're a librarian or information professional, or maybe you're a client, you're a researcher, come to you and ask you to help to acquire data sets. And I think one of the questions I saw, just how would you define data quality? Actually, from my research, I didn't find one that is single definition for data quality, but even the Census Bureau broadly defined the data quality as fitness for use. So I think it really depends on your research needs, and then go through some of the quality dimensions to evaluate the data sets. So for example, in this example of engaging this conversation with researchers, we could talk about or examine together the coverage of the data sets. The data fields of variables, are they really fit the needs of the researchers? How about the geographic temporal coverage? When you acquiring maybe international level data sets, it mentioned it has international coverage, but does that mean covers every country or just a selective of countries? And we mentioned it has the coverage of 2 decades, but maybe there is some variability for the specific year. So we need to be more aware of these languages, and also what is really really the content or data variables behind the written description. And then we could dive into understanding the quality dimension of clarity. Where did they get the data? Did they collect the data from some of the public domain sources or publicly available sources, or did they created data by themselves, or did they really purchase the data from some third party? And variable definitions for that clarity is the definition of the variables they're given are the same as the researchers imagined or anticipated. Is the data, is the actual value when you see all the numbers, are they actual value or are they just estimated, maybe calculated or maybe projected based on certain model? And if they are projected, maybe the different data provider have the different projection model. So that means maybe, as Bobray mentioned, when you purchase database or use different databases, based on different projection models, it may give you different results. That will result in the faculty or the researcher use the different databases or different data sources, it gets different results. So that is called the database effect. There are changes to original data. Is this just original data? They give you like literal, or have they done some standardization, normalization? We need to make the researcher aware of these changes and understand the impact of these changes on their research. The dimension of completeness, how many data have been included in their data sets or databases, how representative these data are. So if a faculty or a researcher wanted to use the data to generate some subset of the samples, are these samples good enough? Are there missing values? Is there a way to fill the numbers, use some kind of calculation, or you have to deal with the missing values? And header data, Bobray mentioned, for example, the NAICS code. If the industry classification changes where the companies were either expanded their business area, it may causing the change of their industry. So if it's just the one value, it may be that that's not the most updated value. It really cause the reclassification errors. So if the researcher wanted to use the header data of NAICS code to do a time series analysis, a trend analysis, if there are some misclassification, it really impact the results of the trend analysis. Accuracy, the dimensions of accuracy, we ask if the data has some errors or systematic errors, that's biases, how up to date the data is, and if the vendor has find some errors, what is their approach to revise the data? Will they have any revision? Is that a systematic revision or just a sporadic revision? So in the case, if the data has a system of revision, I think we need to be really careful because the data you downloaded at a different point in time, the value may be different. So be aware of that changes and how it would impact the data sets you use at different point in time, may give you different results. Consistency considers maybe the format or classification. Is it consistent? If it's not consistent, it really gave us a lot of work to do to further clean up the data. That really undermines the value if we're paying so much money to purchase the data sets or the database. And breaks, if they're either collecting their own data or use some other government data, is really understanding what might be the breaks. If they're using survey to collect the data, how the survey instrument changes, the research methodology changed. So I think make the researcher aware of these changes is also very important for them to do more time series analysis or cross-section analysis. Multiple sources. So there is an example, especially for the data, like for example, we collect from the grocery stores about the products they sell, then the sales price. So the point of sales data, for example, collect from the different grocery stores, it may have the different collection method, and some of the grocery store may give you some of the random weight data and some of them may not have. So be aware of if the data provided by the provider is actually acquired by the third party from the third party, and third party, are they using the similar methods or are they reporting the similar data points? It's really important to be aware of these differences. International data deal with what might be the consistency across a different country, how the currency is converted, the text are translated, all the measurement, how they make that data consistent, and sometimes also duplicates. And we may, in some cases or in many cases, examining all these data quality dimensions, but still find the database or data vendor we talk to is the best on the market. But I think there's still the value to be critical about all these quality issues, so we can factor those into our price negotiation. Hopefully we can get a better deal. Yeah, lastly, hopefully we could have you all engage in this conversation related to how would you envision to incorporate this resources into your teaching or research consultation, or have you done something to incorporate in data quality? Personally, I feel like I don't want to claim an expert on this topic. I'm not, but I hope the resources we created can be instrumental to facilitate your conversation about the data quality with your clients or researchers. Thank you all.
So if you have questions and Q&A and so forth, I haven't been able to see anything since
I have. There's a couple of there's one question that came in the chat first, that people want to get this as a print book. Grace, I remember we talked about this. How do they get this as a print book?
Bobray, this is a good question. We actually have this conversation a couple of times. We feel like maybe the ebook will really save, and people kind of not using ebook more often than print books. But I'm also feels like open to this idea if we still have some project budget left. If there's no better way to use it, I think distributing some of the print copies for free, maybe that's a good option to decide how we're going to spend the money left. I don't want to overpromise, but if you're interested to have the print copy, you can email me, let me know. And if we have the budget, I think we could consider distribute some of the print copies, and I can rank like by the people who contact me first.
Feel free to print yourself, but so as I said, I mean, I know I'm in a slightly different situation, but I did print a copy for myself. Because it was useful, I mean, largely in kind of going through this, but feel free to print yourself. Color is important because there are quite a few color slides.
And then also there are services that will print ebooks for you that are out there. So let's get into the more substantial questions. Arena asked, she really loved what we're doing, and could you explain how you see the role of data repositories? I'm talking that they will not be evaluating data, quality of data. This should be done by the primary researchers as collectors or the users of the published data.
Well, I would say the repositories do have a role. I mean, part of it's there should be minimal standards for the repository. So first you have to have documentation that actually really says what you're doing. You should have something that is in a format that is agnostic to the actual software. It's fine if you want a state of files and all that, but you really do need to have something that is like text or CSV, etc. In terms of, is this good? No, it's not the data repository to determine that. Hopefully, if you're at an academic institution, that part has been taken care of with the grants, with the faculty process and everything else. But I think our role, if we're doing IRs, is to make sure that what is given has all the pieces that you would need. So the documentation, the data, if there are dictionary files, do files, anything that would be used to process the data.
Okay. Olivia asks, the guidebook and knowledge base are a great achievement. Thanks and congratulations to everyone involved with this effort. It was a big effort. Does the guidebook cover, or what could you say a bit about the emerging data quality challenges that we can anticipate with the rise of AI and big data analytics?
So remembering these were done last year, and we did have some questions, and I think it was the one where we had sort of the real world. So we had people from
Session
Microsoft.
6, I believe.
Yes.
Yep.
And so they did have quite a few comments. That one was a very different one. It was really interview style, almost, I'm not going to call myself Oprah, but it was really where it was a conversation as opposed to presentations. And there were some questions about AI.
So these recordings are available on the website, so you can go back and listen to those conversations. Does anybody here want to comment on I don't remember that, it was so long ago.
I'll say so in the ebook, chapter 6 is that kind of question and answer style of Bobray being Oprah, and our panelists answering questions about kind of real world data. And there's an additional section at the end of chapter 6 that goes over the questions and answers that attendees had and how the panelists responded to that. But in terms of last year, what the panelists are saying about AI and big data is that quality matters, right? The quality that you put into a model in order for it to spit out something, the reliability or truthfulness of what it outputs is directly dependent on what it's trained on. So that I remember stuck out to me from that conversation.
Yeah, I think I also don't feel like I remember the nitty-gritty of talking about the AI or big analytics, but I do remember, and also I think when we developed these questions, I was very intentional to ask these panelists about is the quality is going to be less important because, or more important. I feel like would the AI help us to control or make the quality better by some dimension? But I feel like I remember vividly what the message they gave us is it is more than ever the importance of the data quality, because what we ask the machine to learn, you need to feed them the really high quality data in order to make them produce the data or the message with higher quality. So that is one key message I remembered. Thank you.
Before we go to the next question, would anybody like to talk about what are some of the data, the gems that are on the website?
Well, I think all the things that Grace mentioned at the beginning, but there are some extra things that
Right.
I'm pretty sure were mentioned. So there were some additional items. So Rashelle's colleague, Alice Kalinowski, also from Stanford, did a wonderful thing on looking at, this was from an acquisitions point of view, but there were a lot of things as to clauses, what they mean, things that you don't want in your contract, ways to try to work with the vendor. During session 1, Barbara Estey from Yale had talked about, basically in her head that she had a checklist of things that she looked at. So then after the webinar, Barbara wrote it up so that it's no longer just in her head. It's now actually, in the OER. And as I said, like some of the things that were done is, so, like a slide confession is like when we started doing all this and turning into the OER, I remember at one point looking at this and thinking, oh my God, we have wasted so much time. This is the most boring thing I've ever seen in my entire life. It's a conference proceeding, and we did not want a conference proceeding. So it really was reworked tremendously. And, as I said, examples were turned into case studies. And so we hope that it definitely does not read as a conference proceeding and so forth, but there's a lot of extra stuff that shows up in it. And I know Christina has a question, Jennifer.
Do you have any insights on how to incorporate data quality into data catalog records?
Yeah, so this is one of the banes of my existence. So if we are using MARC format or RDA, whatever it's called these days, very much like GIS data. So let's say we're talking qualitative, quantitative. There's just not a lot in MARC that allows. So almost everything has to be stuck in a note field. So this is if we're talking, you know, kind of the standard catalog. So what I try to do at Princeton is to have within the record, as again, notes is where it goes, is sometimes to have some of the things that a person might want to really look at, but you almost need your, you know, a data catalog that is separate in order to be able to put things like sample size should always be given. You certainly in even a MARC record, you should be referring not just to the data set, but if somehow the code books, et cetera, are kept separately, you can't do anything else with that. But so Christina, I've known for a very long time, Christina's from the Fed. I would welcome certainly any things that she has thought of. But if you're stuck to MARC, the notes field is all there is. So ideally, if you can have a separate catalog, I know that everybody hates that, but that's where you can then have your own fields.
And as a postscript to the question we were talking about before with AI and big data, I want to point out, because I've been seeing this a lot lately, the landscape is changing quite quickly. So some vendors, especially commercial vendors or even open web data collectors, they haven't added any clauses yet about using their data in large language models. That doesn't mean that you get, as a user, you get carte blanche to just go ahead and do that. That's something that you want to be conscious about. And if you're, if the terms of service or the contract that you have in place doesn't explicitly say, yes, you can do it, or no, you can't, I would highly recommend checking with the data provider and making sure that what you're doing is allowed. Because we want to be responsible data users as well. And I bring this up with researchers a lot lately.
I have a question for Wei from ISS. This recording will not be behind a membership paywall, right? It'll be available to everybody.
Yes, I
Great.
shared the information in the chat box. We have a YouTube channel, so the recording will be posted there. Everybody can watch it for free, and the slides will be deposited in Zenodo. And we're going to send out an email, maybe in a week, also maybe sooner or later, depends on how much work it needs. And we have a couple of colleagues that are working on all those things at the back end. So stay tuned, everyone. Thank you so much.
Any other outstanding questions or comments? I can't believe we did this in an hour.
Well, I want to thank Wei Yin. I want to thank Bosun, who I don't think is in on the call, but both of them for all their behind the scenes work as part of the ISIS Professional Development Committee. Again, we plugged ISIS a few times. I'm currently the vice president of ISIS. It's a great group of people around the world. And the listserv is one of the most valuable pieces of it because people often pose questions that are incredibly strange. But as well as things about methods and so forth. So it's a really great group. But we do provide a lot of free information. So not just the webinars, our journal is free. It's called IQ, ISIS Quarterly. And so there are many articles over time that appeared on data quality, but obviously all things data. So Olivia is saying, thank you, agree, join ISIS, great group of people. And if your funds permit, you know, if
It's
not,
not that expensive. Going out to dinner.
no,
will
it's
cost you
dirt cheap,
more.
the group. But I'm saying, like, if your funds permit, we're meeting in Bristol, United Kingdom, the first week of June. So I hope to see some of you there, but we have webinars, you know, fairly frequently. and we try to advertise in various places. So thanks everybody for coming. We welcome any thoughts that you have on how to incorporate data quality. Nobody is 100% expert. So we welcome anything that you may have to help this process and to make the world a better place for data. So thank you, everybody.